H.J. Baker is pleased to bring you this encore presentation of Dr. Kip Karges speaking on amino acid balancing and stocker cattle nutrition during the Cattlemen's College, held in conjunction with the Oklahoma Cattlemen's Association's annual convention.
All right, appreciate the opportunity to be here. Kip Karges is my name. I've been in the feed industry for going on 25 years now, give or take. I'm with a company called H.J. Baker. Most of us in here probably have never heard of H.J. Baker. It's an East Coast company. They're based out of Connecticut. They're probably one of the older feed companies in the United States. They've been in business since 1850. Still family owned, fourth generation is operating it today. Have a huge footprint, I guess I would say, in the poultry industry, pretty good one in the dairy industry, and we're starting to make inroads into the beef sector as well as aqua nutrition and what have you. Okay, my training and background, Oklahoma raised and born. I've been in the beef industry for a very long time, was in the consulting industry for a little bit, kind of transitioned over into more of a multi-species role. I was in the distiller's grains business for several years. That's where I started my multi-species role. From there, I've been with H.J. Baker now for a little bit, also in a multi-species role. What I'm here today to talk about is some things that's going to challenge you a little bit. When I first got the invitation to speak here, somebody said, you want to do this? I said, sure. What's my title? I said, well, we'll get back to you. A few weeks later, they came back and they said, Stocker Nutrition. And I'm going, that's a pretty narrow title. I should be able to handle that, right? Well, when I talk to folks on different things as far as thinking outside the box, I always like to ask the question, if you're out on a country road, there's not another car around for hundreds of miles, it's pitch dark at night, you driving with your low beams on or your high beams on? Obviously, the answer is high beams. Why are you doing that? Because you can see more. Well, it's the same thing when we start talking about some of these other concepts that we may not be familiar with in beef cattle nutrition, but yet they're commonly used in other protein-producing species, i.e. poultry or swine. So, as I challenge you, we're going to talk about protein nutrition. Where are we at on the iceberg? Are you on top? Are you getting down close to the water level? Are you below water? Where are we at as a beef industry in terms of protein nutrition? So I'm going to kind of review some things there. But part of this, before I get going, is I often call my folks and I'll tell them, give them an update what's going on in my life, that stuff, and I'll get to explaining some things. Pretty soon, I think I get off between the white lines and I'm in the bar ditch and I go through the fence and I say, does all this make sense? And there's a long pause on the other end of the phone and they say, sounds complex. So that means I've gone too far and I don't want to do that with us today. So do something, throw something at me, I guess. So discussion topics. Everybody likes a good cow dog. This is a pretty good one. It's my brother's dog. He's pretty happy, pretty proud of her. She's an Australian Shepherd. Saves him a lot of work. I've always found it interesting, though, when I meet a lot of you folks and everybody, I come across their pets sometimes, and they all have some kind of interesting names. My brother named this female Australian Shepherd Moose. I'm like, really? I don't get it. But anyway, the evolution of the protein system, where we kind of evolved to. Crude protein is what everybody's in here is familiar with. That's the anchor. That's what we make the trade on. That's what everybody knows in terms of when you went to school. We're going to talk a little bit about encapsulation nutrition. There's some different things that you probably are not familiar with there. Amino acid nutrition. That's probably something that most of us probably haven't spent a lot of time looking at, especially in the beef sector. Heavily utilized in other species, though. Crude protein, as I said, been around forever. That's what we utilize. That's what everybody's comfortable with. It's 100% of the requirements, right? You go through the literature, even today, you still see crude protein everywhere. It's in our nutrition models. It's everywhere. Is that the right thing to be utilizing? And that's my question to you as a beef industry when your competition is kind of moving off and doing some different things. And I'm going to show you that here in a minute. From crude protein The beef cattle industry has broken it down into two different segments: rumen degradable protein, bypass protein, or rumen undegradable protein. You'll hear me say bypass protein, escape protein, rumen undegradable protein. Those are all kind of interchangeable terms. Okay, that's been around since probably the late 70s, early 80s is when we started moving that direction and breaking this crude protein concept out. Okay, today, metabolizable protein, we refer to it as an MP system. Anybody in here heard of metabolizable protein? Okay, see a few heads nodding up and down. That's good, but the competition is way off in front of us. Metabolizable protein is broken down in microbial protein, as well as rumen undegradable protein and endogenous crude protein. Very small amounts of endogenous crude protein. That's cells sloughing off basically in the animal. In terms of amino acids, this is a crude diagram of kind of what happens in terms of flow of nutrients and protein through the animal. You got feedstuffs, crude protein, and that's going to break down in the rumen to amino acids, more nitrogen there. You're going to feed the bacteria population. Everybody's probably heard that. And it's important to do that. That's all rumen degradable protein. What escapes the rumen then ends up in the hind gut of the animal. That's where the most efficient utilization of amino acids is going to occur, right? So, how do we get there? Animal proteins, blood meal, fish meal, those types of protein sources coming from animal are generally very high in amino acids. Vegetable protein sources, pretty low in amino acids. And so if we want to utilize in beef cattle some type of amino acid profile, you're probably going to have to get an animal protein source in. That can be challenging, especially with BSE today. 20 years ago, it wasn't that bad. BSE has changed all that. You can still feed blood meal sources. That's not a problem. Fish meal, obviously, and then poultry products. Encapsulated technology has come along, and it started probably in the mid-'80s. Methionine is an amino acid. That came onto the radar screen and was really designed for the dairy sector. Okay, then we moved forward with the dairy sector into the early 90s, and they came with lysine. And you started seeing encapsulated lysine. Those are your first two limiting amino acids in dairy nutrition is what they've determined. Why do you want encapsulation? Encapsulation is like an M&M is how I always explain it. The chocolate is the amino acid or whatever nutrient that you're encapsulating. The outer coating is generally made up of some fat that's not going to be digestible in the rumen. So you bypass the rumen, and then you get into what we call, you see this buzzword around a lot, precision nutrition. Everybody's talking about being precise. How do we get more with less? That's a big thing today, especially in some of the different geographical areas that I travel in the United States. That's a very big deal. Increased performance is really what drives a lot of this technology. You're using the same technology that they encapsulate human medicine is now being utilized to encapsulate an amino acid. Regulatory reasons is another thing that we're concerned with. Out in Idaho here a few weeks ago, had nutritionists tell me, you know what, it really doesn't matter if your product improves performance. What matters to me is if it can help me reduce my nitrogen output and my phosphorus output. That's a big thing for certain geographical areas. Nutrient flow. It's hard to do these encapsulation technologies. It's not easy because you're concerned about two things. You've got to get a high amount of the material through the rumen, so it's a high bypass value. And then we got to come back and we got to get a high digestibility value once we reach the small intestine. So it's very, very tricky, and it ends up going through, it's kind of like painting a car. You put several different coats on there on this molecule that's suspended in air, and it's called a fluid bed. It's suspended in air, and it goes through this, and it gets painted with a fat coating. Okay? It's hard to target a certain sector of the digestive system and get a high release rate. It's not easy to do. Well, nutrient flow is a lot like we've all sorted cattle, right? You're in an alley. Your alley is your small intestine tract. Okay, when you're in that alley system, you've got gates. Same thing in the intestinal tract. You've got gates that's going to allow certain nutrients to go across into the bloodstream. And so if you have somebody's hollering at you, cut off those 2 black caps or what have you. You know, you got to move pretty fast, and all this is happening pretty quick. Same thing with nutrition. It's difficult to do this. With encapsulation amino acids, well, it's probably our future. The dairy industry is probably 15 years ahead of us in the beef industry. I'm going to show you some research here in a minute. There's not a lot out there, but there is some. It's probably something that you're going to see more of, not just an amino acid encapsulation, but you're going to see other key nutrients encapsulated. Because what if we can say, I want to encapsulate a vitamin, and I want to deliver it to the small intestine. That way I don't have to worry about so much being lost in the rumen. That's where we're going with this type of technology. Animals require amino acids, not protein. The poultry guys, they figured this out. They started back in the 60s on amino acids, believe it or not. Amino acids can be broken down into essential amino acids and non-essential amino acids. Essential amino acids mean you got to have it if you're going to get performance, peak performance. Methionine and lysine are probably the 2 that we're going to focus on. There's some other ones on that list on the essential amino acids that we're not going to focus on because we don't know much about them. You go over to the poultry side, they're balancing today for 5 of those essential amino acids. Not just a total amino acid basis, but a digestible amino acid basis. So they're way, way out there. Okay, switching gears, going into some of the research here on amino acid nutrition. But before I do that, I want to share with you just a little bit, a couple slides on the competition. Every now it's good to look across the fence and see what the competition's doing, right? Well, this is an interesting slide. If you look back 1912, it took 112 days to get a broiler to 2.5 pounds. Okay, they were barnyard chickens, basically. Then that line crossed, and that crossed somewhere in the 60s, late 50s, early 60s, to where you're at today. Well, this is 2010, but today you have birds that are producing at 12 pounds a chicken. I talked to a poultry nutritionist earlier this week. She has brought off some birds here recently. Some of those males in that flock, she said, were weighing 19 pounds. It's a chicken. Well, days to slaughter has come down too. They're much more efficient. What drives this whole system? Genetics, right? That's a big piece of it. But probably a bigger piece is nutrition. You can have a really good genetic animal, but if you don't have premium nutrition going into that to feed it, you're not going to optimize your genetic potential. We all know that. So 2005, you see that bird right there. The United States is in a big market for white breast meat yield. That's what we want here in this market. That's what they're going to produce. The only way you're going to get there is through amino acid nutrition, though. Dairy industry, they're also ahead of us. 2001, the NRC, which is the Bible for nutrients, and it's got all kinds of tables and research. It's a great summary. Basically, it says here's the requirements for an animal, here's what you need to feed, here's the feed ingredients, and you can go through it. We all utilize it in the nutrition world. They're on the metabolizable protein system. The beef NRC came out about that same time. They also listed metabolizable protein, so we're neck and neck. The only thing difference is these guys, they went ahead and started balancing for methionine and lysine. And all the nutrition models that you have today on the dairy side, that's what they focus on. They've also identified they're producing milk. They said, okay, what's our deficiencies? So they did an analysis and figured out what their potholes were. They know what they need to fill in those potholes with. From a feedstuff standpoint, as I talked a minute ago, you have basically animal protein sources if you want to go get some type of bypass amino acids. Or you can use encapsulation amino acids. The reason a lot of the data that is out there today is inconsistent is because of animal protein in the rendering process that it goes through. Time, temperature, moisture, those are all very important things when you're rendering animal byproducts and producing these products here. Blood meal is shown up here at the top. There's some nutritionists in here. There's probably some feed manufacturers in here. Which one's the best one? We all utilize color as an anchor. So which one of those blood meal sources up there, if you're looking for bypass protein and you're going to buy from one source, and these are 3 different sources, and by the way, this is hardcore research here. This came from University of Nebraska. The individual spent 6 months gathering these samples So these aren't just one-off samples. This is a composite of 6 months of gathering samples. That's what I was told when I was given this slide. Okay? To get the values, though, it's intense. And those of us that have gone through grad school, you go through the in situ process, Dacron bag, you weigh out your feed material here, you put it into another bag, you stuff it into a rumen-cannulated animal, you let it incubate in there for X amount of time, you pull it out of the rumen-cannulated animal, and then the next stage, mobile bag. You take your bags that you pulled, put them in a washer, you wash them, rinse them, get them clean, you dry them down, you do a weight. So now we have bypass value. The next step, you stick it back in the animal, in the small intestine. And there's not many of those animals around. That's hard to do, cannulated small intestine. So you stick it back in the small intestine, and then you pick up the results in the feces. And now you have digestible X, whatever you stuffed in the bag. You know how much material went in. You know how much material came out the back door. You have a bypass, and now you have a digestibility. It's not quick to turn these results out, I guess is the take-home message here. So when somebody says, I have a bypass value, I have a digestibility value, you might want to ask them, how did they come up with that? Because that is probably the most critical thing when you go down the amino acid road and start balancing for things. So if you go back to that slide, rumen undegradable protein, 3 blood meal sources right here. That first one is horrible in terms of RUP value. The other 2, they kind of fall in line where they probably need to be. Okay, again, I picked this one. Blood meal source 1. I've been doing this a long time. I was kind of ashamed of myself, right? It's horrible. I would have never picked blood meal source number 2 to be the best. And that's what ended up happening. And so as a feed supplier or as a nutritionist, and you're picking these things out for your customer, then you got to ask the question, what gets to the producer? If you look down here in terms of, okay, this is 1 ton of protein, blood meal. How many pounds of lysine is in that blood meal? Well, if you look at it from that standpoint, it's all pretty doggone good. But if you look at it from a pounds of rumen undegradable lysine that's actually getting to the small intestine, man, if you chose number 1 like I did, I just cost my customer a bunch of money. So you got to be careful as a take-home message when you're looking at animal proteins. Quality control is very important when you look at all this stuff. Okay, so what's the option? This encapsulated amino acid. That's probably your option. That's what I'm going to talk about now. And we're going to go into some stocker nutrition, give you some information on that. I'm going to give you some information on backgrounding. I'm going to give you some information at the very end here on the feedlot. Okay, 1978 is when they first identified lysine and methionine as your first limiting amino acids in beef. I came onto the scene as in my master's work, it would have been mid-80s. I worked with bypass proteins, stocker cattle grazing native range up in the sandhills of Nebraska. We're swinging a big hammer back then. We were using soybean meal and feather meal as our bypass protein sources to see if we could get a response. I had other nutritionists that were on my committees kind of laugh at us when my major advisor and I said, you know, this is what we're going to do for our project. They kind of laughed at us and said, you're crazy. Just focus on crude protein. Okay, at the same time, there was another gentleman down here at Oklahoma State, Chuck Hibbert. He was looking at bypass proteins in beef cows. Does it have any type of effect? Dale Blasey, I went to school with him up at University of Nebraska. He was also looking at bypass protein in beef cows. Both of them determined you get a response. My responses was pretty phenomenal. We had a great year in the sandhills that year for rain. Growing conditions were ideal. Weather was ideal. I had cattle, the control group right here. They ended up gaining 2¼ pounds with nothing on grass. Okay, then you start looking at pounds of rumen undegradable protein that was given to them in 3 different treatments. Average daily gain, 236, 231, 244. Here's your differences from the control. So about 1/10, 2/10. It really never went anywhere. Farmland Industries came and visited us and said, well, that's kind of nice. And I think they tried to get some things in their product line, but they really couldn't, because when you start feeding some of these protein sources from animals, they're not very palatable. That's a challenge. Here's some other work done by Richard Zinn and Fred Owens. Fred Owens was on faculty at Oklahoma State for many, many years. These are light calves coming in, 435, final weight. 684, 700 pounds. Here's the average daily gain, 295, 334, 31, 305. So this level right here of 2% rumen undegradable protein coming from animal protein sources gave them the best results. Didn't take much. They got some really good quality animal protein sources. And they got a really nice response. Feed conversions, a whole lot better, half pound almost. London and Curley. Curley is Dr. Curley, he's a nutritionist at University of Missouri. He's looked at amino acid nutrition for a very long time as well. Lightweight calves again, 600 pounders, final weights in that 7 range. There it shows average daily gain. It was a nice linear effect with it maximizing at this 8 grams of lysine being fed, 2.81. 2.81 compared back to your control. That's a pretty significant increase in average daily gain due nothing else to amino acids. This is actual lysine, metabolizable lysine that was supplemented. Not total lysine, but metabolizable lysine. You get down here and you see metabolized lysine, total grams of lysine supply per day for the nutritionists in the room, everything that I've reviewed in the data, it typically is going to fall in the mid-40s, it seems like, for lysine in terms of metabolizable grams of protein total that you need for a young growing animal. Fast forward, when I came on board, we had encapsulated amino acids with this company. I said, we ought to be looking at beef, guys. So we did a project in Oklahoma at a stocker operation. We went to the guy and we said, hey, we don't want to change anything. We just want to add this particular amino acid, an encapsulated amino acid. That's it. That's all we did. So there was a control group and a treatment group. We ran 2 different projects with him. One was on grass cattle and one was on his total mixed ration. He was feeding total mixed ration and backgrounding cattle there as well. Very common ingredients were being fed. On the grass, he supplemented on a daily basis, 70% DDGs, 30% soy hulls, 5 to 7 pounds. We came in with 25 grams of an encapsulated amino acid that we call Safe Gain. Results, control, 2 pounds, treatment, 2.08. So you almost picked up a tenth. A little bit bump on feed conversion as well. This is at 25 grams. They're on grass, 60 days during the dead of summer. Right now is when we did it 2 years ago. We started in July and went through August. We wanted to use the worst time of the year possibly that we could choose to do this because I wanted to know if the product could survive all the production noise that it's going to be subjected to out in the real world, and it did. Backgrounding phase, 2 treatments, 4 reps. Had a control ration, didn't change anything, came in and added a treatment with 25 grams of the Safe Gain. Again, ending up with similar results. About a tenth improvement in average daily gain. Feed conversion, we didn't see an improvement there. That didn't surprise me the way this operation is ran. Typically, they're doing a lot of sorting and topping off cattle from pens to move them. So it's really hard to track feed intake, but we gave it our best shot. But we did see a difference in average daily gain. There was 1,860 cattle that went through this program. We had almost, well, there was over 500, I think, that went on the grass side. So significant numbers went into this. Everybody wants to know, well, that's not much average daily gain improvement. What's the ROI, right? What's the bank account going to say at the end of the day? Control group, treatment group, you get a 0.09 difference. This was for the total mixed ration. This column here represents the pasture. You got 0.08. Economics. Now granted, this was done 2 years ago. The economics of the cattle industry was a whole lot different. Over $2 a pound was what cattle were bringing at that point in time. Anyway, even at that rate, we saw 50% return on investment, almost a 36% return on investment on the pasture. Not bad, not bad. So what we did with this, we took it and we said, okay, we need to do a dose trial now. We've got a response. It looks like the product's going to survive out in the production world. What is the real dose that we need? Because I back calculated into it. 25 grams was probably on the high side. So we did a dose trial at Kansas State. We did this last year. Again, we did it in the summer because I wanted to have the heat stress on the animals. This was in confined pens, feeding a total mixed ration. We fed 3 levels, 15, 30, and 45 grams. Okay, you're going to be seeing the results of the control versus the 15 gram. You're not going to see the 30 and the 40, or 45. And the reason you're not going to see those 2 treatments, we got responses, but the economics were not there. The product cost too much, so there's no sense. I mean, we got abstracts, and it's being presented at National Animal Science this week. The information is there if you want to see it, but what I'm going to present to you is what is the most economical return on investment was. You saw dry matter intake go down, you saw average data gain go up again, and we saw feed conversion. This is the win for us. Almost a half-pound improvement in feed conversion. What's the ROIs? Okay, this is current in terms of ration cost with current feed cost, as well as what the current cost of the cattle are. And you walk through that, value of the gain, diet cost, it costs 6 cents per head per day. The feed, this encapsulated amino acid product, increase in daily revenue, that's a 216% return on investment in a highly controlled situation. Good results. They back up what we saw out in the field. So commercial pasture situation, a little over 4% improvement in average data gain, return on investment 35%. Commercial backgrounding, increased average data gain almost 3%, return on investment right on 50. Kansas State, average data gain 5% improvement in average data gain. We dropped dry matter intake a little bit. We increased feed conversion over 5%. The return on investment was quite high, over 200%. That's at 15 grams of a product, which is going to deliver about 6.5 grams of true digestible lysine. What effect does amino acids have on finishing diets? There's not a lot of it out there. This is really on the cutting edge in terms of does this have any effect on finishing cattle. Here we're looking at amino acids supplied as a percent of the requirement. So this is coming out of Curley's, Dr. Curley up in University of Missouri again. They calculated, here's our requirement. And then they fed half, 1x, 1.5, 2x blood meal sources. And you can see right here with this, the lysine and methionine, they're around that 150% range. What happened to ribeye area? And this is something that's supporting what I have heard from producers that have fed the product with, that have talked to me. They said they typically see an increase in the loin area on the cattle. Well, it drastically went up here. Highly significant linear effect occurring, as well as quadratic. It dropped off at the 2x level. That's a lot of improvement in ribeye area from one amino acid. I'm going to wrap it up here with this finishing project. It was done by our competition, Cattlemen Industries. This was published just last year. They have a encapsulated lysine and methionine product. This is really interesting because we're going to do a similar type project with our encapsulated lysine source, safe gain, at the end of this year. Looking at the same type of thing. This was done with a repartitioning agent. Repartitioning agents, between that and probably growth implants in finishing cattle, are probably two of the biggest things that's hit that industry in a long time as far as ROIs. However, Zerpaterol, for a lot of reasons, it's no longer on the market, but that's what the study was conducted with at the time. So what they did here is they had 180 steers, 5 treatments, 134 days on feed. They had a negative control. That means nothing. No Zerpaterol, nothing. Positive control, they were fed the Zerpaterol, and that's it. What happens? They had a lysine treatment with Zerpaterol, methionine with Zerpaterol, and then a combination of lysine and methionine and the repartitioning agent. Now remember, the repartitioning agents are not fed the entire finishing cycle of an animal. It's fed during the last 20 days. Ractopamine is the other one. I think it goes out, what, Dave, 30, 40? It's a little longer on the other compound that's out there in the industry. What happens in the last 20 days when you were using Zerpaterol? It kind of blew me away. I was thinking we would get a response because what's happening with a repartitioning agent is you're shifting nutrient digestion that typically at that stage of an animal's growth curve is going towards fat deposition. Now we're shifting it back to protein accretion. And so if you've got a large amount of protein accretion occurring in a very short period of time, in theory you should have a need for amino acids. They saw average daily gain go up 0.44 pounds with the lysine versus the positive control. Wasn't significant. However, when I put the numbers to it at current live cattle prices, ROI is 80%. Feed conversion went up almost 11%. Again, not significant. Methionine, what happened there? They almost got 0.6 of a pound improvement in average daily gain the last 20 days. That's a lot. Live cattle prices, you calculate it, you get a return on investment of 87%. Feed conversion up by 13%. With the methionine, both situations here on average daily gain and feed conversion, highly significant. What happened when they added lysine and methionine and compared that to the positive control? Average daily gain went up 0.66 pounds, return on investment 89%, feed conversion up to 18% improvement. Okay, those are big numbers. I was surprised. I didn't think it'd be that big. Well, now it comes down to kind of a decision time, right? You have a lot of new information in terms of amino acids. Is it applicable? Is it not applicable to your situation? These are kind of challenging ingredients, maybe a little bit to work with. You can't suspend them in liquid feed like we would like to because they're a fat-coated material. What happens when you put fat into a suspension? It wants to float. So it's challenging to get it into liquid feed. You can't run it through a pellet dye because the melting point of the fat, you'll melt the fat coating on these products. So it's very challenging. Can you incorporate it into a total mixed ration? Absolutely. Can you put it into a mineral? Haven't done that, but I don't see why it wouldn't work. Okay, so the vehicle for delivery oftentimes is a challenge for us, but that's where you got to get a little bit creative. In terms of visiting with folks about this, it's kind of new technology, amino acid nutrition. You know, beef guys were kind of pretty comfortable in crude protein, a lot of us. But the broiler guys, dairy guys, they're way out in front of us. I encourage you to move, push people there. Get with your feed supplier, get with your nutritionist, say, what is up with this stuff? Ask lots of questions. So bottom line, does amino acid nutrition have a role in your operation? Something for you to think about. I encourage you to think outside the box. That has helped me through my years of being a multi-species nutritionist today as I am, to say, what's working over here, why wouldn't it work over here? I mean, it just makes sense. So with that, I'll be happy to entertain any questions.
So as a seed stock producer, I'm always concerned about either buying bulls or selling bulls or cows that are creep-fed and altering their genetic potential. From a producer standpoint, do you see that we're going to get to a point where feed is going to outweigh genetics like the chicken deal, or what balance do you see in your mind?
I think what you're going to end up seeing is what we're seeing right now in black and white, the dairy cow. They have genetic potential, and a lot of these cows produce in excess of 100 pounds of milk per day, and some of them are. Our challenge as nutritionists is we're limited to how many calories we can get into that animal within a 24-hour period. That is the challenge. And so to answer your question, you have genetic potential that's outweighing or far beyond the nutritional capabilities of what we have to work with today. That's why you see these different types of nutrients coming into play. Same thing is going to happen on the beef side, I think. You're going to see similar type results. The beef cow, Dr. Lawman, he's sitting there in the back. He and I are in the middle of discussions right now about a project later this fall looking at these encapsulated amino acids in the beef cows. I think it's going to work. I really do. And so if we can improve milk production, now you're starting to tap into what's the genetic potential of my herd, back to your question, right? So today, are we there? Are we keeping up with genetics? I don't think you are. Nutritionally, I don't. I think it's a challenge for us, based on what I see anyway.
And you fed both cows this type of a product. You're not going to. They're both going to still stay. The difference genetically, if one of them milks heavier than the other, you feed both of them. You're not going to make them both super cows.
No.
There's
You
still
got to
gonna
have
be a
the
difference.
genetics.
There's still going to be a difference within the genetics.
Absolutely. Genetic differences are still going to be there.
Same with ribeye and all that type of stuff.
Yep.
Yep.
And that's kind of, plays into the poultry guys. I mean, they can create a new generation of birds rather quickly compared to what we have to deal with on the beef side, right? And so we're never going to compete against something that's converting 1.5, 1.7. That's just not the beef industry. But can we get animals to improve and get feed conversions even further down than where they are today? Can we get milk production higher than what we have today? I don't know. Cactus feeders, Dr. Lama and I, we were talking here a while back. They're doing some interesting things as far as dry lotting cows and you know, basically running cow-calf and dry lot situations. So as improvements in genetics get there, then utilizing these different feedstuffs that are much more concentrated in energy, that's going to help you. That's why cactus is making it work, in my opinion. How much it
Dr.
moved?
Karges, would you repeat the question, please, sir, so everybody could hear?
Yeah, I think it is on the ribeye slide. How much improvement did we see? Well, it was a significant. I'd have to go back and calculate it on a percentage basis, but they went from like 8 or 10 square centimeters up to 12, 14. So it's significant. And that's the interesting thing when other people, like I said, producers that have fed it, most of them will make that comment, man, I noticed my cattle getting thicker in the loin area. Well, when I came across that paper, that kind of makes sense maybe. Like I said, there's just not a lot of that type of information out there that we can say hardcore, this is what it is, this is what's going on. These are all basic trends, but I think I presented enough information to the group this afternoon in terms of amino acid nutrition, lysine, methionine, your first two limiting amino acids. You're getting responses, not just in stocker cattle, the young growing animal, but also the feedlot animal. With that, I'm going to turn it back over, and we should be good. Thank you for your time.
Very good. Let's give, thank you.